what's part of it as well are these cancellations or postponements of these games, and we've got another one here, and 4 in total in the SEC, including Tennessee and Texas A&M. So we know that just a few weeks prior to the opener, Tennessee had the 6 or 7 cases that affected about 31, and that was the alarming number that was reported initially, was something like 31 Vols were traced, but when it came down to it, about 6 tested positive total on the football team and staff. But in regards to this cancellation, it's all Texas A&M, as you had clarified with me just a few minutes ago.
Yes, I'll do you one better than that. There was a day in camp where I think Tennessee had right around almost 60 guys who could not participate in practice, whether it was for the few who tested positive or for the many who were contact traced. I mean, now they've gotten it more down to a fine science in terms of the contact tracing, but Knox County's policy has always been a pretty aggressive one. And, to be honest, candidly with you, I agree with that. I think that's what needs to be the case. But Tennessee certainly has been aggressive on that front. And but since the season started, they had all kinds of trouble in camp. And I think that's at least part of the reason maybe why you're seeing some of these struggles you're seeing from some of these guys. Not all of it, but some of it. But since the season has started, 6 weeks and counting, they've had 0 test positives. They've had a couple guys who had a false positive, but then they got that cleared up. That was a problem at the lab. But other than that, they've not had a single positive test case in 6 weeks now. They're beating COVID. They're not really beating anyone else right now, but they're beating COVID. I sort of understand some of these issues, but I also believe that in a hypothetical world, if Jeremy Pruitt and Derek Ansley, if either one of them were on the job market tomorrow, either one of them would be one of the highest paid defensive coordinators in college football. Either one of them. That's not an opinion. I believe that to be a fact. Just a couple of years ago, Ansley's one of the highest paid, or is the highest paid secondary coach in the NFL, and Pruitt was one of the highest paid defensive coaches in college football. So you put those two together and you say, oh, you're really good at defense. You should be, right? You should have some things figured out. In the past couple of years, despite some limitations, physically, they've been pretty decent, I think, overall defensively, at least compared to what they should be. This year, I'm not seeing that. And it's hard for me to tell what's amiss because athletically, they have a little bit more depth, I think. And now there's no question they missed the Nigel Warriors and Daryl Taylors and Daniel Batulis. Who wouldn't miss those guys? But you didn't lose that many guys. They brought back some athletes, and they're getting lost a little bit in coverage, and it's surprising.
This is a game against Arkansas that I've seen in about 4 different chunks, and the latest being last night. So I didn't see it live, but I've thrown it in the DVR several times, and I did hear that Eric Gray ran it 19 times in the first half. So they were definitely committed to the run and trying to use their strength against Arkansas's weakness, and it worked early. There was such a good feel surrounding this program because of the way it concluded in 2019 and another strong recruiting class coming into 2020. There were people out there that were actually touting this team as a potential SEC Eastern Division champion. Not myself.
Me, but others were.
Exactly. I'm going to take myself out of that mix too. I thought that was a little bit crazy talk, a little bit out there. But at the same time, I did say the 2 most intriguing teams in the country to me coming into this year were North Carolina and Tennessee. I just wanted to see if they could continue on the ascent. So for Tennessee, to your point, 2020 being a little bit tricky, and maybe coaches are in a bit of a safe haven in regards to extending their livelihoods for maybe a year. And regardless of how bad 2020 would be, even in a regular year, I wouldn't myself put Jeremy Pruitt on a hot seat after a fine 2019. One bad season typically doesn't do it for me in regards to that. As we stand here at 2-4, as you mentioned, and staring at probably the second and third best teams in the conference the next 2 games, Florida and Texas A&M, who are those players that Tennessee fans would like to see get more playing time?
Well, I think to answer your first point, I do think that it is going to be really important for Jeremy Pruitt and his staff, and they need to be doing this now, but especially as soon as they get out of the season, it is going to be so important for them to quality control this and figure out what exactly went wrong. Did they just was it that preseason camp? Because Tennessee had a lot of guys miss a lot of preseason camp. I think more than some other teams did. And was that just an issue, or did they try to do too many complicated things where guys, just in Zoom meetings couldn't quite get everything down? I personally do not know, because there's never been a year in my career doing this where I have been around a team less than I have this year. Just we're not even allowed in the building, and understandably so because of what's going on. So everything we're doing over the phone. The only eyewitness accounts we get, period, are in games. So we, normally we take what we hear from people and we combine that with what we actually see, and that gives us a bit more true understanding of what's going on. So I think that's going to be important for these guys to figure out exactly what went wrong right now this season. But to answer your second question there, I do think that there are some guys. I mean, you mentioned Bailey. That's the obvious one people would like to see if given a chance. But there's also some playmakers out there, some young guys. Maybe you've seen a little bit of Jalen Hyatt. Let's see more of Jalen Hyatt. This is a kid who can fly. I mean, this kid is an absolute burner that they have not had at Tennessee in a couple of years. Even with Jennings and Callaway, they would kind of out physical you in some ways. This guy can just flat out run by you. I think Malachi Weidman is another kid, is a freshman who is an incredibly exciting prospect at wide receiver. Every bit of 6'4", unbelievable vertical leap. This kid was on the AAU basketball circuit winning slam dunk competitions. He is a freak of an athlete, and he can run. And he's a little bit, you could say a little bit raw maybe as a prospect, but he's getting there, and he's an exciting player. And I also would throw guys like Jimmy Holiday and Jimmy Callaway in there, all those freshman receivers. Tennessee's not getting enough separation at receiver, so let's see kind of what you've got there. I think tight end's a tough place. They need help there badly, but I think they may have to develop that. I don't know if they've got any just right now good to go guys, but they badly need help at tight end. Maybe see a little bit more Jabari Small at running back. He's shown you a couple things. Maybe he could keep improving. Then you got a guy like Key Lawrence on the back end, who's a touted safety prospect, a guy who can play safety in the long run, maybe nickel, maybe corner. He can do some different things. There are some guys, Morgan Joseph, Tamarian McDonald, a freshman safety. There's a long list of guys. They've recruited pretty successful classes the past couple of years, and some of those kids have already gotten themselves in the mix. Some of them haven't yet. And so the longer these struggles continue, the longer that the more cries you're going to see from people to get those kids out there.
So I misspoke. The Auburn game will be the next game on November 21st. The Florida game was the final game of the season. Texas A&M will be played on December 12th as the final game before the SEC championship game the following week.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yes.
Wes Rucker, Go Vols 247 Sports, and Tennessee will be back on the field, hopefully, against the Auburn Tigers again on the road on the Plains November 21st. Wes, we appreciate you stopping by.
No problem. And I hope Auburn gets things cleaned up because it's had its own COVID mess right now. And, I hope for everybody does. But, I guess selfishly, I'd like to cover a football game next week. So if Auburn could clean it up and Tennessee keep it clean, that'd be great.